Chaos theory is a delight. I take no claims of understanding it, but as a wildlife filmmaker, it makes perfect sense to me that if a butterfly flaps its wings in Kolkata, there'll be a cloudburst in Roorkee. The butterfly effect, and that's why I'm here. But let's go back just a little bit. I grew up in a perfectly logical universe. My father was a chartered accountant, and the math was really important to him. So basically, X leads to Y, and that's how we get to Z. But I had a lurking suspicion that perhaps there was another way of getting to Z. In fact, to be honest, I'm not even sure if I really wanted to get to Z at all. I was never very good at math. Yeah, that was pretty much the extent of my mathematical skills. But Dad always insisted that, you have to pass in that dratty subject, which I finally did in my board exams. And that was the last I ever saw of quadratic equations and trigonometry and other very odd-sounding things. And, pity, because now I realize I probably should have made better acquaintance with it, but that's the butterfly effect. So after the very feeble flapping of my mathematical skills, I decided to run as far as possible away from maths and dived headlong into the world of arts. And since I did very, very well in English, I decided I was going to do English literature. Very good decision, because the study of English literature taught me the very complex and wonderful art of storytelling. And if today I am a filmmaker, it is because I learned the craft of narrative first. Now, in a predictable universe, the logical thing for me to have done would have been to go ahead and do a post-graduation in literature and then a doctorate and become a professor. But you see, I was never a very big fan of straight lines. And that's what my life's been about, always, the butterfly effect. It first flapped its wings when I was about 3 years old. It was my birthday. I believe I was quite a cute little girl, but instead of asking for a cute little doll, I asked for a big ugly duck. That's right, my first friend in life, a pet or whatever, was not a doll, it wasn't even a dog. It was a duck. So while all my friends used to take their dogs for a walk on a leash, I used to take my duck for a walk on a leash. And that was the beginning of the lunacy. And over the next few years, very insidiously, I pretty much turned my parents' 12th floor apartment into what can only be described as a mini zoo. That's a pigeon that used to greet me right after school. And those are the kind of creatures I had in my flat at home. I forgot to put on that list a very obnoxious rooster that used to wake my whole building up at 4 a.m. I wasn't a very popular child with the adults. And, that's a goat I was trying to bring home from a holiday in North Bengal. That is when my mom said, not happening. So, that's pretty much it. So the butterfly flapped its wings again when I was about 6 years old. Another birthday, and I said, okay, this time I want a Snow White birthday party. Pretty standard for a little girl who's 6. Except the little girl also wanted horses at her birthday party. So I wanted a horse ride. Fine, that's great, except my birthday is right in the middle of monsoon. So while all my friends all turned up in these beautiful white dresses with white bows, looking like little princesses and like Snow White, they had no clue that it was going to take place in the middle of a very muddy field. So they all turned up looking like this, and then there were horses, and then they went home looking a bit like that. There was something so outrageously delightful about doing the unexpected and pushing the lines and being a little bit different. And if you think about it, all our lives, for that matter, are a continuous demonstration of the butterfly effect. Now, you could have been a lawyer, but you're in Roorkee. You could have been a big corporate honcho, but you're Chetan Bhagat. I could have been a pianist, but I'm a wildlife filmmaker. And I suppose every time the butterfly flapped its wings, it set up conditions in my childhood that would later perhaps become the base for what my decisions would be in my adulthood. So if there is a moral to be if there is a moral to this all, then it would be that if we accept that our lives are inherently chaotic, then we might want to make decisions that are not detrimental to our long-term happiness. That's why when the gates of college closed behind me, and I looked at that unbending road in front of me. That road that I knew exactly where it would be leading, that straight road ahead. I flinched. Because I knew exactly where it would lead. That 9 to 6, that big job, that big fat wedding, those holidays in Bali and Bangkok, and because that's where everybody goes. And before you know it, you've landed yourself, life has passed you by, you've landed yourself a heart condition and high blood pressure and the whole schmeal of like successful living. Let me put it this way. Because I was never a fan of straight lines, last night while most people were perhaps watching Netflix or TV, I was watching the harvest moon rise in Manas National Park, a bit like that, in a silver forest. And if I have seen thousands and thousands of fireflies dance below the stars, it is because I chose not to study the business of straight lines. And that is why right after college, I decided that I would go off to South Africa. South Africa is where it all started for me. That's where I did my first sort of wildlife filmmaking camp, if you can call it that. A camera workshop of sorts, right in the middle of the wild. Now, a lot of people ask me what it's like to be a wildlife filmmaker. And the answer is, for a regular person, it's probably really hard. Because you've got to wait hours. Nothing happens in the wild. You have to sit and stare at grass for hours and hours and hours. And only then, suddenly, some amazing things happen. And despite all the difficulties, in Africa, I was among some of the most amazing creatures in the world. And somehow those challenges of this career, of actually having to be out there in the wild and face that kind of physical and mental challenge and stress, never felt difficult at all. Because when it's right and when it clicks, somehow those challenges just do not matter. So Africa is spent in the beautiful company of these animals and things like that. Right after that, of course, right after my little African adventure, a lot of very well-meaning adults thought it was exactly that. They thought, okay, great, she's taken one of those, gap year things that they do nowadays, these kids, and she's going to come back to a normal life and get a real job, and she's not going to, do these things. They said, oh, beta, take it as a hobby kind of a thing. You know how it is, standard advice. They had no idea that I had plans of taking this seriously. But many a times they said, but you have to consider, does that really look like something that you want to do for the rest of your life? Are these places that you go to on your own even safe, secure? What about job security? What about, what is the industry in India in wildlife filmmaking? And to be honest, they were perhaps right. And for a young girl, as a wildlife filmmaker, it's that much harder because, people don't sort of associate a young girl with wildlife filmmaking. What they normally associate is like 45 male, big, tall man with a big hat. So it was just not sort of fitting in. And there were moments where I kind of felt like, maybe am I doing the right thing? Will I succeed? I mean, what if it's too hard? What if I really don't get any jobs or assignments? I mean, I love it, but how am I going to go ahead? And that's when the butterfly flapped again. You'll be happy to know I fell in love. Meet Mazima. She's a 2-year-old cheetah. I met her in Nairobi in Africa, a little outside of Nairobi in Africa, in Kenya. And I spent 2 weeks with her, had the privilege of doing so. And she would come running from a distance every morning when she would see me. And I befriended her, and she befriended me, and it was absolutely beautiful. And then all that wonderful logic that was hurled in my direction flew out the window once again. I said, forget it, no matter how hard this is going to be, I was going to go for broke, no problem. I had no mentor, I had no strategy. I still decided to go. All I was armed with was with my passion, perhaps my talent, and a singular drive to do this for a career and nothing else. And as a filmmaker, my singular ambition has always just been to be able to tell the beautiful stories of nature that are extraordinary, unusual, unexpected. And that's why I went on to make films like this one. This is a little frog that you get in Shillong. It's called the Xmas frog. And it's a very rare species because it exists only in Shillong. So the film was called Thumbelina. And now it may seem like a very small thing to you because it's not a very pretty frog, quite delicate. But studies have shown that if it disappears, then its disappearance affects the ecosystem that it belongs to, and that affects the neighboring ecosystems. So we're back to that butterfly in a very different way. So I started telling stories that were not just about flagship species, but things that were small, because even the small things, those small flaps of the butterfly, have a much larger significance. Back to my career. There came a point when I had to sort of decide that, I was going to do this as a full-time job now, and this was going to be it. So I decided after that I was going to sort of formalize my commitment, if you can call it that, and applied for a course in science and natural history filmmaking in the University of Otago in New Zealand. That was a game changer. That was an absolute game changer for me. The entry process was really hard, first of all. It was like, there was a very rigorous, apart from an application, there was a very rigorous interview that I had to go through. I kind of felt like I was applying to the NASA. And finally, having been accepted, I found myself at the edge of the planet in a place called Dunedin in New Zealand. And that course really opened my mind. It taught me storytelling and camera work and things that on a completely different scale altogether. And by the end of that course, I had to make myself a film. Now, that's when, once again, that butterfly flapped. I found a very unusual story, and I recognized it to be a very unusual story. I made a film called Sirocco, How a Dud Became a Stud. Now, there are only 125 kakapo parrots in the world today, and all 125 live on this one island called the Codfish Island. That itself is an amazing conservation story. But what makes it even more special is that one among these 125 kakapo parrots is convinced he's a human being. So he doesn't even think he's a kakapo. He thinks he's a person. He only hangs out with people. And he's so funny, and he's in such a character that one thing sort of led to another, which is available in the film. And he became an absolute superstar and a sensation in New Zealand. So my film was a rags to riches story about his life, because Sirocco today is the only bird in the world with a government job. And because it's a rags to riches, it was called How a Dud Became a Stud. I'll show you a little clip from it.
Driven. It's a 60-minute drive to his 5-star high-security accommodation, where he can finally drop his guard. Meet His Excellency. Not human, but parrot. Sirocco is a very rare bird, a kakapo. It's a privilege to see him in broad daylight because he's nocturnal.
That's Sirocco. That film, made on an $800 budget, which is about 50,000 rupees, I suppose, went on to win the Green Oscar. It went on to be seen in 80 different countries. And at some point, I had the privilege as well at the Wild Stream Film Festival of handing a personal copy to Sir David Attenborough himself. Never did I plan that all these things will happen when I made Sirocco. I just made it with whatever money I was given as a student to make my graduation film, but I did my very best. And when you do your very best, somehow the butterfly effect kicks in. Now, Green Oscar was one of the Panda Award, as it's called. It was a singular honor to get that. No other woman from India had got it before in the global category, and it was an absolute singular honor. But having said that, Green Oscar or not, it didn't make the wildlife filmmaking career any easier. There was still no industry in India, a proper formal industry in wildlife filmmaking. The jobs were still hard. It was still difficult to get assignments in the right time, the right kind of assignments, and I found myself rock bottom again. It was a roller coaster constantly. But when you've taken a leap of faith, you've got to take a leap. When you've taken a leap, you've got to take. When you've leaped into chaos, you've got to leap with faith, is what I mean. And before I knew it, I got another assignment for 2 years with Animal Planet, which took me around India and showed me how beautiful our own country was. I landed up in places that look like this, in Kashmir. That too is Kashmir. And like that, that's not Mars. That is the Rann of Kutch in Gujarat, not very far from here. And I also ended up in this beautiful little hamlet in the Indo-Burmese border where I made another friend, a gibbon that decided to come down from a tree, sit on my camera, and look for nits in my hair.
But it's actually, she's like sitting on the 5D, on the lens, like on the lens as a seat. So we need to not do that. Ow. Ow.
So you see, that's the beauty of the unpredictable, the kind of things that happen, the surprises up life's sleeve, really. So many times plans haven't worked out for me, so many ideas haven't been realized, so many stories I haven't found funding for. So much of the time that roller coaster has been at rock bottom. But you know, you've just got to carry on with clenched teeth, with grit, and a little bit of panache and planning. And that's how earlier this year I ended up in the UK and got the privilege of working with some of the best in the wildlife filmmaking industry, the top brains in the wildlife filmmaking industry. My time at the BBC was unparalleled in terms of the experience I gathered. And then again, having continued to stick with it, at some point a little bit more of magic happened. I got to actually work on location with Sir David Attenborough himself. And furthermore, got to spend a lovely weekend with Mrs. Lee Durrell Gerald Durrell's wife, Mrs. Lee Durrell. And I'm sure a lot of you have read My Family and Other Animals. And it was an absolute amazing weekend. And that's where life has sort of taken me now. And you ask, how does it come to me? The answer is quite simple. Be faithful, be brave. Be ready to face life, good, bad. Be ready to face the fertile, the fallow, and accept it in all its glory. And somehow, somewhere, that butterfly will flap its wings and something will happen. And then you can say with some amount of confidence, as I can say with some amount of confidence, that life has not passed me by, that every moment has been lived. And that's the beauty and the symphony of this wonderful thing that you call chaos. Thank you.